The chair is not here, so as the vice chair, I will be leading the meeting. So welcome to our witnesses.
Call the meeting to order.
I call the meeting to order. If you can't tell, I've never done this before, so.
Point of order.
So I see a couple of hands raised. Ms. Korn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before we start, I would like to move my motion that reads, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship and department officials to update the committee on the 2022 annual report to Parliament on immigration, including Canada's Immigration Levels Plan 2023 to 2025.
I'm very pleased my colleague moved this motion. I think it's very important that we have the immigration minister here to testify on this issue, particularly given the tremendous amount of testimony that we've heard on how the backlog in the immigration system has impacted Canada's ability to meet its immigration targets. I have heard over the last few weeks from stakeholders across the country deep concern about how this backlog it has not been addressed in the immigration levels report, and just concerns about how there's this huge delta between the number of people and targets that the government has set and the actual structural ability of the government to deliver on that. So I'm very pleased that my colleague from the NDP has put this motion forward. I'm sure the rest of my colleagues here would like to articulate the same in support of this motion, but I look forward to Minister Fraser's attendance swiftly at this committee so that we can hold the government to account.
Je voulais faire mon point d'ordre, Madame la...
I had a point of order. I just wanted to make sure that the sound checks had been done with our video conference witnesses. Was it done, the sound check?
Gentil, maintenant.
Thank you very, very much. Then I will support my colleagues from the NDP and the Conservative Party.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just going to add my voice saying that I think it's important the Minister come in based on the report that was tabled to Parliament before November 1st on the annual report on immigration. Just if you go through the report, it's a very rosy picture of what's going on, but we're all getting inundated in our offices, in our constituencies, of people who are facing enormous backlogs just for the simplest of applications. I was just made aware just a few days ago of a case where there's a family trying to bring in a newborn from Brazil, and they were told by IRCC they're facing a 500-day wait time to have it processed. By the time the newborn gets their application through, they're not a newborn anymore. They're a toddler, and obviously a cuteness factor is directly related. The longer it is from a newborn, the less cute it is, and the grandparents may not be as enthusiastic, but I'm sure they want to see this newborn immediately. And also, there is an order paper question response that was tabled just yesterday, I believe, to one of our colleagues, Ziad Abou Taif, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Manning, shows that the department is only able to to meet its service standards, something like 46% of the time, and it's abysmal, especially for employers, and where we're facing critical shortages, 1 million jobs going unfilled. I'm sure we all get this in our constituency offices. Employers are desperate to get people in to fill critical jobs. This report is much more because it paints such a rosy picture, but then we're getting this data back contradicting the department's ability to meet any of these targets into the future. If we're going to meet the labor shortages, if we're going to reunify families, if Canada's going to do its part to make sure that we can keep protecting people who are being persecuted overseas, we've got to have the minister in to explain himself how he's able to meet these targets. I just don't see it based on the data we're receiving back through order paper questions, through question period, and other ways. So I would like very much the minister to come in. So I'm very much in support of my colleague from the New Democratic Party for this motion.
We have a speaking list. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to add my voice to Madam Kwan's motion. I would love to support it. And when it comes to meeting the targets, Madam Chair, we all know that our government has either met or exceeded the targets over the past many, many years. I remember first time I got elected in 2006, the Conservative government was there. In fact, it is the Conservatives that put the cut to family class. Now we are talking about parents and grandparents. In fact, if you look at the record of our government took 20,000 applications every year. And that is a great achievement over what the previous government was doing. And in fact, the targets that we set up, 435,000 immigrants to come next year, 465 a year after, and 500,000 in 2025. And I have had discussions with the minister. In fact, if we look at the past record of the Liberal government, we will meet those targets.
Thank you. Next is Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, as well. And I certainly do want to add my congratulations to my NDP colleague for bringing this motion forward. Anytime we can get the minister before the committee to understand the significance and the importance of the numbers that need to be dealt with through the processes that we're dealing with on refugees and immigration is very important. And we need to I know my colleague across the way was just talking about what the government's done, but that was 7 years ago, and we're dealing with a completely different situation in Canada today where there is so much labor force required and needed and more immediately. And so while we look at the different mechanisms for bringing people into Canada to do work here, we need to look at whether it's skilled labor that's required and make some changes in regards to how those people can get into the country and get to work as quickly as we possibly can. And I think it's, I just wanted to back my colleagues here and the Liberal colleagues that are supportive of this motion as well, to be able to say that I think that it is imperative to have the minister appear before us on this, and I appreciate the fact that he will. We'll just have to work with the committee to find a time with the minister's office that he can actually attend this. I know he's going to be away some of early part of next week, so I really would like to see if we can do this get to this committee as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I have four more people on the speaking list before we can go into today's agenda. So I have Mr. Reddycop, then Mr. Brunel Desep, then Mr. Alkhoury, and then Mr. Rampal Garner. Mr. Reddycop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things I just wanted to mention was there was some talk about the multiple times that we have the minister coming to this committee, and I think it's important. This is a different issue, what we're talking about here, because of the numbers issue. The other things that we're going to be bringing him for are going to be all specific, like, for example, the Roxham Road study. That's a very specific thing we want to talk to him about. So I think it is important that on this issue of the report that we bring him to talk about these numbers, because this is a very critical issue. And there's more to this than just simply the numbers that are there. There's a lot more information in that report about some of the other groups of streams of people that come in, many of the groups that actually are not really treated fairly. And so there's some questions I think that I have for him in that regard about who ranks over who and how that all fits together. And so that's all part of what I see in that report and in the numbers. And so I think it's really important that he come to speak just to that. And as long as he comes to the other reports, we're going to have the sub-Bs. I'm assuming that we're going to get him for that at some point as well. That's a whole other discussion that we have, and the different, the Afghanistan reports as well. So there's many different topics that we need to talk about, and I think it's very important that we have him here specifically on this report, because it's a very significant report and it affects very many people. And as my colleague said, each of us MPs deals with this every single day in our offices back home. And so there's lots of questions that we have for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brunel Desep.
OK, merci. Je pense que tout le monde est d'accord.
I think everyone agrees. I think we've just wasted 10 minutes on a motion everyone is in agreement with. We have witnesses that are here. We have an important study to do here. I think we should move on to other things. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a speaking list. So, Mr. Alkhoury.
I could go briefly. Thanks, Madam Chair. I would like to welcome our witness here, and I welcome positively the motion of Madam Kwan, but I would like to assure everyone here that the priority of this government and the Minister of Immigration is to fill the gap of workforce shortage. That's why, if you know that the money is allocated, we have more than $500,000 allocated in order to bring other resources to be able to treat and to process demand. We have given a chance for a student who graduated his to be able to apply and to work here in order to grow up our economy. And I believe our target, Madam Chair, until 2025 to have 500,000 persons over here in Canada well qualified to integrate our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Khoury. Now we will go to Ms. Rampel-Gardner.
Briefly, Chair, I would just note for my colleague, Mr. Dhaliwal, who talked about the government meeting immigration's targets. It's all well and good to set targets. It's another thing to be able to process those targets. You know, the government could say they want to bring the entire population of the globe to Canada and create an endless list, which many people are languishing on. 2.8 million people are languishing on right now. But it's very important for the government to both set targets as well as establish processes that can actually, in a just fashion, in a timely fashion, process these applications, which is, to me, what the subject matter at hand is. So I just wanted to, Chair, note that for the record before we proceeded to a vote.
Seeing no further hand raised, we can take a vote. So if I can please ask Madam Clerk to conduct a vote. Okay. Mr. McGuire.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I, too, have a motion that I'd like to put on that's been tabled, and I want to just put it forward today. And that's the one that I gave notice of motion on October 21st. And it is, reads as follows, that Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada table in both English and French with the committee until further notice the previous month's number of people entering Canada through non-official points of entry who claim asylum not later than the 5th of the month succeeding the data.
Mr. Reddycock?
Just for the information of the committee, this information is readily available. We had this discussion last time, but we need this information at committee, and unless we get it given to the committee,
Point of order, Madam Chair.
then that's the whole point. So that.
Point of order. Ms. Kayabaga?
I'm really confused of what's happening right now. There's a motion that's been tabled by Ms. Kwan and that you were calling a vote on. Are we moving another motion on top of Ms. Kwan's motion?
Ms. Kayabaga, we have adopted that motion which was moved by Ms. Kwan. The members didn't want to have a recorded vote, so it was show of hands, and that motion has been adopted. So Mr. McGuire has tabled another motion. Okay. Yes, Mr. Reddycock.
Thank you. So that's the point, is that I believe this information is readily available. If we have it tabled to the committee, then it's accessible to the committee to use in the report. So that's the intent of this. It's not meant to create work or anything. It's meant to bring it to the committee for our use.
Rampel-Gardner?
Yes, Chair. I would like to echo my colleagues' comments. This is a motion that has been adopted by this committee in previous parliaments, I believe unanimously, and it's a tremendous data point for the committee to deliberate and also to contextualize recommendations. It's also of use for the clerk and the analysts. So certainly I support my colleagues' motion on this and just would like to, for Liberal colleagues as well as other opposition colleagues, to note that this has been something that has sort of been standing practice of the Immigration Committee to adopt in previous parliaments. Thank you.
Seeing no one else on Ms. Lalonde?
Yes, and I'm very sorry that we have to do this in front of our witnesses because we're anxiously waiting. But I was wanting to know if my honourable colleague would be receptive, and I would like Ms. Chair to move an amendment that instead of 5 days, it will be 20 days.
Ms. Lalonde. Ms. Lalonde has moved an amendment to the motion moved by Mr. McGuire, so we have amendment on the floor. Mr. Kimmich?
Sorry. Sorry, sort of a 5 to 20?
Yeah.
Did you mean, I just don't understand the amendment now.
Oui, excusez-moi, c'est que
Yes, the idea would be not the 5th day, but the 20th day of the month.
Oui.
Yes, Chair. So so what's the impact of making this change? I'm trying to understand what would be the departmental reason for not being able to provide it earlier in the month as opposed to the 20th of the month, if Ms. Lalonde knows the answer to that?
As we've discussed with some member, the 5th of a month is maybe premature, and not that we have anything. It is already online, as you know, but by the time that everything gets to be aggregated, it's a collection of information from another department, as the member very much know. CBSA also work. It's not just IRCC. So what we're asking is a very reasonable approach, just to say instead of on the 5th day of the month, it would be the 20th. So the department, with consultation with their other ministry, would have a chance to ensure that the information that is online posted is relevant, but also factually well informed. So what we're looking is not to, actually we're looking forward because it's already online, but we would like just to present a friendly amendment, so therefore allowing the ministry to look with all the other ministry to aggregate that data on the 20th of the month. That would just make a best practice. Merci.
Grégoire?
Yes, thank you. The reason that it's the 5th of the month is because we're giving them 5 days to post information to us that they've already got available on the first day of the month. So they don't need 20 days. It would be my off-the-cuff comment on that. I appreciate my colleague for raising that as the number of days, but this information is available on the first day of the next month, and we're giving them 5 days, the 5 days into the month, to be able to assemble it, and just all they're doing is transferring it to this committee, and that's the point of having the motion in the first place, is just so that the committee gets the information directly and we can deal with it at our meetings. That would be my initial.
Mr. Reddycop?
I'll take other people.
So my thought is just, if it is published, it's published, and if it's wrong or if there's an error, I'm sure it gets corrected, and I think the same process could be applied here too. So I guess I don't see why we can't just go with the data as published online on the 5th, and if there's a mistake in a previous month, it's an easy thing to fix it.
Correct.
Ms. Lalonde?
So just for record and factual information, that information is collected by 3 departments. It is already online and posted on the 20th of every month. What you're asking is the 5th, and what you're saying is that you're okay that we are, as a government, and you as a member of parliament, knowingly aware that we may post information because of the length and the information that we need to gather, that it would be wrong. I'm sorry, I don't think that's the kind of government Canadian wants to see. So with all due respect, what we're asking is just a friendly amendment that, as it is already widely available, in Mr. Maguire's motion, I'm asking for a consideration for our very hard at-work public servant who will need, through 3 departments, collect, aggregate that data, and then make sure that it's posted for all of us to see. I didn't think that it was wrong of me to ask for this amendment in terms of making sure that the information is factually relevant et très pertinent, mais aussi que l'information est vérifiée.
Relevant, but also verified.
Ms. Lalonde, Mr. Dhaliwal?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think Madam Lalonde has already explained it very well. That
Ms. Rampal-Gardner?
Chair, I'd just like to point out perhaps a bit of a fallacy that my colleague Ms. Lalonde may have made inadvertently. So when the department undertakes data to be provided to a parliamentary committee, there is a legal onus on the department to provide correct and factually verified information. So it is misleading to say that the department would provide the committee with wrong, so-called wrong information, as the parliamentary secretary has characterized to this committee. I do realize that this may take some effort on behalf of the department to provide the committee with this information. However, to my colleagues, particularly in the NDP and the Bloc, I'd like to note 2 points. We are embarking on studies where this data is relevant and pertinent. And the fifth, having this information provided to us, factually correct by the department, as this motion would compel it to do, is important for us to contextualize our information. The second thing is that I would like to note that the public service acts at the behest of Parliament, not...
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Rempel Gardner. The bells have started ringing. So is it a vote? Yeah, what has been called? Okay, so vote has been called. If the members want to proceed, I need a unanimous consent. No? Okay, so I don't have the unanimous consent. The meeting will have to be suspended, and we come back 10 minutes after the vote. I'm really sorry to all the witnesses who are here. I know it's like you took time out of your busy schedule to be here. I'm really sorry for that. We will have to suspend the meeting for the vote. So the meeting is suspended. meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. We had an amendment on the floor, and I had 2 people on the speaking list when we suspended the meeting. Before we go into, just for the sake of clarifying what we are proposing today for the witnesses, first of all, on behalf of the committee members, I really want to thank you and apologize to you for the delay. I know you are really busy and you took time out to come and provide us your testimonies, but because of some motions being brought forward and because of the vote. So having talked to the witnesses, because some members have traveled from far away and some are really busy and they cannot come back. So out of our 6 witnesses, because we just to make sure that we have a fulsome discussion on this important topic, some of the witnesses are willing to come back to the meeting. So based on my discussion, so today we will have 1 panel and we will have Miss Janet McFetridge, Mayor of Champlain, and we will have Apolloni Simzi, Secretary General, today, and the 3rd witness for today will be Rema Jamos Imis, representative to Canada, representing the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. For the other 3, I really want to apologize. We will reschedule the session. The clerk of the committee will be in touch with the other 3 members to reschedule the meetings. So if my request to the members would be that if we can quickly go through that amendment and that motion so that we can at least have the opportunity to hear from the 3 witnesses today, because it will not be possible for them to come back. We have the mayor all the way from New York.
Then we take a vote on the amendment.
So we have a sub-amendment on the floor. So we have a sub-amendment on the floor. I had Ms. Kwan next on the list. Ms. Kwan.
Okay, we're ready to vote.
On the amendment?
Yes.
We're ready to vote, okay?
On the amendment, vote will
Yeah,
go
we
on
have
the
an amendment on the floor, okay, brought by Ms. Lalonde. So, amendment. We have an amendment on the floor. Would you like to do a recorded vote or show of hands?
All in favor, ask all in favor.
20th. All those in favor of the amendment moved by Ms. Lalonde?
Here we go.
Okay,
Jeanette.
adopted. Okay, now we are back to the main motion. All those in favor of the motion? Oh, okay. As amended. Adopted. Okay. So we will now get to our witnesses. So first of all, we will thank you for the cooperation, and we will be hearing from our 3 witnesses and then going into round of questioning. Thanks to the other 3 witnesses for adjusting to come back again. So first of all, we will hear from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, being represented by Ms. MCS and Ms. Tamjidi. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear on this very important subject. As the UN agency serving refugees and asylum seekers in 134 countries and territories, providing technical advice to improve the situation of asylum seekers is an integral part of our advisory role worldwide. I'd like to begin with some critical figures on the state of global forced displacement to put Canada's current situation in the broader context. In the first 6 months of this year, an unprecedented 103 million people have been forcibly displaced by persecution, conflict, and violence. 2/3 of this population are hosted by bordering nations, which are low to middle income countries, often struggling with their own political and economic, social, and challenges. And while displacement figures continue to rise around the world, solutions have unfortunately not kept pace with the average length of displacement spanning 17 to 20 years. Regrettably, the absence of meaningful political action to address the root causes of displacement, along with increased conflict, insecurity, and the effects of climate change, mean this trend is unlikely to be reversed soon. Included in these statistics are approximately 4.9 million asylum seekers. In this larger context of global displacement, it is important to note that Canada currently receives less than 1% of the world's refugees. For those refugees who are able to find a solution in Canada, research demonstrates that they make several contributions to this rich and vibrant multicultural society. Census data provides strong empirical support for the claim that Canada's investment in refugees pays off. For instance, after 20 years in Canada, refugees contribute more to income tax than they receive in social supports. Other key metrics, including home ownership, job creation, and educational achievements, all point to the conclusion that refugees make substantial contributions to Canada. Ensuring safe and unimpeded access to asylum is a legal obligation that Canada, along with 148 other states, have committed to honouring. We understand that there are always challenges in receiving asylum seekers and ensuring that these critical rights are safeguarded. Each time I visit Roxham Road, and the most recent occasion was only 10 days ago, I'm struck by two observations. The first is the humane and dignified approach of authorities and the organized fashion in which Canada processes these claims. The second, equally compelling observation, which comes from my interactions with asylum seekers on each of these visits, is that these are human beings, each with their own individual story to tell, often linked to experiences of trauma, devastation, and loss. And when they come forward seeking Canada's protection, irrespective of how they arrived, they are exercising their right to do so. It is critical to note that when irregular asylum claims are evaluated by Canada's robust system, 61% are accepted as refugees. In human terms, that is 6 in 10 lives saved from persecution. All unique stories of suffering, survival, and resilience. Given Canada's strong and sophisticated system, I have no hesitation in saying that it is well-equipped and resourced to continue ensuring safe access to asylum. As communicated to our counterparts, continuing to strengthen triaging and processing efficiencies to enable flexibility in the face of this increase in claims is a key priority. In this regard, we continue to provide support and work with authorities on possible improvements to eligibility processing at the border, which has seen some delays due to the increase in claims. While this ongoing effort to strengthen processes is underway, consideration may be given to allowing temporary work permits for asylum seekers who arrive at the border before they are referred to the Immigration and Refugee Board. Canada has had an excellent track record in ensuring that asylum seekers obtain work permits, but recent increases in arrivals have led to delays in eligibility processing and waits of up to 18 months. This is important not only for the economic and self-reliance of those who are crossing, but also their well-being, their dignity, and overall prospects for integration, not to mention being an important resource for Canada, which is still experiencing labour shortages across many sectors of the economy. Canada continues to be a source of good practice and positive examples relied on by other countries around the world, and UNHCR remains committed to working with government bodies and civil society to ensure that asylum seekers continue to be received in a manner that upholds international legal obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Simzi, Secretary General, representing Alliance de Burundi du Canada. Ms. Simzi, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable members, the Alliance, l'Alliance des Burundi du Canada, is honoured to testify before the committee on such an important and vital question for individuals facing difficulties and even distress at a particular point in their lives. Indeed, since Roxham Road in Quebec started to be massively used by asylum seekers in the hopes of finding a country of asylum in Canada, the debate relating to it has only grown. The number of people crossing has also grown. Some individuals believe the federal government is being lax when it comes to enforcing admissibility, whereas others believe it is a concerning humanitarian situation that Canada simply can't turn a blind eye to. Unfortunately, there's never been a conclusive debate on why there is a massive influx of asylum seekers on the one hand, and on the other, what the appropriate response would be in alignment with Canada's responsibilities when it comes to protecting asylum seekers. Any observer acting in good faith and any migrant and asylum seeker advocacy organization, including our alliance, agree that this situation results from the asylum-seeking protection system in the U.S. that has been at a standstill. It also has to do with the deadlines that are causing a number of problems and putting asylum seekers in an untenable human situation. The experience for most asylum seekers who have crossed through Roxham Road is this. They've lived in the U.S., they have introduced an assignment, they have made an asylum claim, and they were kept on hold for a number of years without seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. No one should forget that asylum seekers are mostly mothers, fathers, children, having left their country of origin on their own in the hopes that they could reunite with family members once they're welcomed as refugees. Unfortunately, once they get to the United States, the uncertainty within the protection system leaves them in an impasse, and that's a source of a whole other set of problems. Testimony indicates that these claimants turned away at the Canadian border often or may be detained in the U.S., and that further complicates their situation. Closing Roxham Road with no alternative tangible solution to solve the issue of asylum seekers that are in this impasse would be essentially, it would mean that Canada was using its geographical position to shirk its responsibility with respect to protecting asylum seekers. As has been reported in the past, desperate claimers sometimes take perilous journeys at the risk of their very lives, sometimes to the point of death. So it is this untenable situation for asylum seekers that has led to the debate and controversy about the Safe Third Country Agreement. We welcome the federal government's efforts that has set up basic infrastructure to care for asylum seekers in this category right by Roxham Road, and in general continues to help refugees in their integration efforts. Even though additional efforts would be still required to receive these claimants, we encourage any practical action rather than anything that would worsen the conditions of these already vulnerable individuals. It would be wise to allocate further resources to the RCMP, to the CBSA, and to all stakeholders to foster more effective, safer work, and even grant hearings much more quickly for these asylum seekers so that they may, especially those who meet the conditions, access the workplace in Canada. Still, testimonies indicating that claimants that have come through Roxham Road have been welcomed as refugees, and they're well integrated, and they take an active part in advancing our country.
Ms. Simbizi, the time is up. You will get an opportunity when we go into round of questioning to speak further. There were 5 minutes for all the opening statements, so you will get an opportunity in the round of questioning. We will now proceed to Ms. Janet McFitridge, Mayor of Champlain, New York. Welcome, Ms. McFitridge. Thank you for traveling from that far. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you all for inviting me to speak. Roxham Road is better known in Africa than it is in the United States. And I am likely the last American that these refugees meet on American soil as they continue this journey. I cannot walk in their shoes, but I can walk beside them. As these refugees lean into me whispering, I am scared. I am running for my life. People are trying to kill me. I have no other options. I listen attentively, and I join in the last few steps of this journey. Refugees arrive via taxis or private drivers and sometimes on foot, in families, alone, small groups, or in van loads of more than 15. There are looks of confusion, apprehension, fatigue, sadness, a vast array of emotions are visible as they climb out of the taxis. Strangers helping strangers with luggage, children serving as translators for their parents, mothers handing babies to teens or even to me so they can get organized, toddlers wandering as toddlers do. It is a microcosm of humanity working together regardless of language, nationality, or appearance, all under a cloud of fear as they see the RCMP waiting a few feet away. For the majority of these refugees, their prior interactions with police officers have not been positive. I have seen people walk down the path with their hands in the air. Others have fallen to their knees with their hands raised in the snow. Some have said, "Arrest me, I have no other choice but to come here." One woman from Turkey ran down the path sobbing, right into the arms of the officer. He very quietly said, "This is Canada. You don't need to cry. You won't be harmed." Allow me to share a couple of stories from Roxham Road with you. Very recently, a card pulled in with Connecticut plates on it. The young man, all alone, asked me if this was where he could get into Canada. He said his plan was to leave the rental car, but he was very, very nervous. His hands were shaking. He had tears in his eyes. He wanted to know if the police would beat him or harm him in any way. I said no. And as I spoke softly, trying to calm him down, he explained that he was gay, disowned by his parents, fired from his job, and his choice right now was to leave or die. He would be stoned to death if he returned home, so he decided to try Roxham Road. But now he was terrified. I said, "Look at you. You did it. You are here with me, and you are safe. You did it." He smiled and said yes, and after a few more minutes, walked away from the car and down the path. On a frigid day last February, a large van arrived and outpoured a dozen people. Among this group were two little girls, sisters, dressed in matching pink sweatsuits. You know how you dress your children up for a special occasion? These girls were ready for their new life in a new country in brand new clothes, and they were shivering uncontrollably. It was about 5 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. I had no children's coats with me, so I wrapped them in large adult-sized jackets. They were so bulky the girls had trouble walking, but I put my arms around them and steered them toward the trail where they slowly walked into Canada. Day after day, people from all around the world travel on Roxham Road seeking safety and a place to call home. Young men who have hugged me saying they left their mothers behind. Old women all alone. A pregnant woman in labor. Elderly men who can barely walk. Strong mothers who will do anything to protect their kids. And then those precious children who have no choice in this journey. One of those youngsters recently told me how much she liked the stuffed animal I had given her. And she asked, "How long can I keep it?" I said, "It's yours forever." And as she skipped down the path into Canada, she turned around and said, "Thank you. See you later." Humans are naturally rooted to where we were born or have spent time. We need to feel that we belong. The writer Maya Angelou expressed it so well by saying, "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." Many times the refugees have told me that they did not want to leave home, but violence, drug cartels, threats of starvation, the effects of climate change, persecution for their sexuality or their religion, protection of daughters from FGM. Humans have a strong will to not only survive but thrive, a dream that most of us share regardless of where we were born. The ties that bind us together as humans are stronger than our differences. May each of us do what we can to help all of humanity find home. Thank you.
We will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin our first round with Ms. Rempel Garner. Ms. Rempel Garner, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. I'd like to direct my questions to the UNHCR. Thank you for your attendance today and for your work. Some civil society groups have characterized the United States of America as not safe for many refugees. Do you agree with this characterization?
The ultimate determination on whether or not the U.S. is a safe country comes down to the two countries who are signatories to the bilateral agreement called the Safe Third Country Agreement. There's a responsibility on the countries that enter into that agreement to do periodic reviews and to determine that the safeguards required in order to make sure that agreement upholds the basic legal standards that are applicable.
Does the UNHCR believe that those standards are in place with the United States?
UNHCR is charged, as I said at the outset, with providing technical guidance and support to governments around the world, including the United States, on areas for strengthening asylum systems.
I'm just looking at whether or not what the UNHCR's position is on whether or not the United States meets standards set by you that would determine that the United States is safe for refugees.
There is no perfect asylum system in the world. All asylum systems can be strengthened. UNHCR has communicated on the occasions when we feel that certain gaps exist in the UN system. We do that on a bilateral basis. You can also check the public record where we have also expressed concerns about certain practices.
Thank you. So I will take it on the record here that the UNHCR is not making a determination at this committee in this study on whether or not the United States is a safe place for refugees.
I'm not making that determination.
So
here,
could
no.
you provide some clarity on what the UNHCR's position is?
Certainly. I'm happy to do so. There are gaps in asylum system in every country.
Okay.
And where those gaps exist, we provide technical guidance and support to help strengthen those systems. And we have done so on a bilateral basis, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly.
I might try a different line of questioning. How many refugees did the UNHCR refer to the United States for resettlement in 2021?
I'm afraid I don't have that figure handy, but we did make referrals. We
Thank
do
you.
refer refugees to be resettled in the U.S. annually, and we continue to do so.
Has the UNHCR asked the United States to increase its acceptance of refugees for resettlement?
UNHCR asks that of every single country that's a signatory to the Refugee Convention. It is the one thing I repeat on a day-in, day-out basis, as do my colleagues around the world.
So
we need more resettlement.
So with the UNHCR recommending refugees for resettlement to the United States, would it be right to characterize that the UNHCR has determined the United States as to be a safe place for refugees?
UNHCR would not refer refugees to be resettled in a country that is determined to be unsafe.
Thank you. I note that there was a report on activities from the Inspector General's office, a report from the High Commission, which was tabled in October, so about a month ago. And there were some fairly alarming statistics that have come up in previous parliaments in this committee around abuses in UNHCR refugee camps, including 259 cases of sexual abuse and rape in UNHCR refugee camps, a 20% increase in the previous year. I am just wondering how the UNHCR can reconcile some of these figures when pronouncing whether or not a country is safe or unsafe for refugee resettlement, given some of the abuses, grave abuses, that this committee has heard within UNHCR refugee camps.
Well, I'm afraid I haven't had the opportunity to review the report, and I'm sure that there are a number of facts and figures and context in there which would be important for me to review before giving you an answer to that question. But I can tell you that there is a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abuse, either within our organization or with the organizations that we partner with. Beyond that, it's very difficult for me to answer that question
This is
because I haven't had the opportunity to review the material that you're citing.
I would ask you to do so. I remember sitting here in this committee about 7 years ago, listening to recent survivors of the Yazidi genocide talk about discrimination that they faced in UNHCR refugee camps by the ethnic majority that was charged with running the camp and how that affected them. Those abuses stay with them today, and it's quite disappointing that the leader of the UNHCR or the representative sent to testify in this committee is not aware of these stats. What this committee needs to hear from the UNHCR is a commitment to accepting these abuses and also to, frankly, move countries like Canada and the US away from suggesting that one of the safest countries in the world is somehow not a place where refugees can find safe harbor. I guess I would just ask if the UNHCR feels that it is beneficial to the integrity of upholding support for immigration in Canada to see the Roxham Road border crossing continue to function as is, particularly with a 2.8 million case backload in the immigration system in Canada.
I'm sorry, I need to unpack that a little bit because I think there were 3 questions embedded in one. And I do...
15 seconds left.
I would like to correct the record that I didn't say I wasn't aware of the report. I said I didn't have the opportunity to review the report. Our Inspector General's office issues a lot of reports. So it's difficult for me to answer one particular point in a report that I have not had the opportunity to review.
I would ask you to avail yourself of doing that.
I would be very
Thank
happy
you.
to do so if you share the details.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Ms. Rempel Gardner. We will now proceed to Mr. Ali. I know Mr. Ali and Ms. Kayabaga will be splitting time. So Mr. Ali, you will have 3 minutes, and then we will go to Ms. Kayabaga. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today to share their knowledge and experience. My question is directed to the witnesses from UNHCR. What are the UNHCR's views on agreements where 2 countries work together to share responsibilities when it comes to welcoming asylum seekers and avoid duplications and inefficiencies?
Has no objection to safe third country agreements or agreements designed to ensure that there's responsibility sharing and regional approaches, so long as certain safeguards are built into those agreements and minimum criteria are present, including things like ensuring there is access to safe and efficient asylum systems in either country that is a signatory to the agreement, including ensuring that neither country will return people to situations of danger. Those are just 2 of the criteria that would have to be present. But UNHCR has no objection to such agreements with a view to improving protection and asylum being concluded by 2 independent sovereign states.
Thank you. Could each of the witnesses share with us if they think there would be any negative result if either Roxham Road were shut down or if the Safe Third Country Agreement were amended to shut the entire border to all irregular crossings?
I think...
Can anyone?
Oh, yeah. Should I go ahead? Okay.
Yeah, anyone can jump in.
Okay. So, I mean, as an observer who is there daily, my fear would be that if Roxham Road were shut down, that people would cross the border just any place in the woods and the fields and all those remote areas, and I think it would really be a safety issue. That's just from my experience of watching it.
Okay. Thank you. And again, from the witness from UNHCR. I'm sorry?
Mr. Ali, I think it's my turn now.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you so much. Thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be here, and specifically to Mayor for your compassion and for your very compassionate testimony. I'd like to direct this question to you, actually. Just because my time is really limited, if you could really try to respond quickly. What are the things that you can suggest that the U.S. and Canada can do to better support asylum seekers crossing these borders?
A suggestion for what the two countries can do to better support the asylum seekers? Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Well, I'm just an American private citizen who's trying to be helpful. The American system, to me, is extremely broken, and at our level, with our numbers on the southern border, which you are seeing coming into Canada because that's the pipeline right now, I'm not really sure what the answer is to that. How they could work better together. I think maybe my friend sitting next to me might have a better idea.
Thank you for your response. I will go to Madame Simbizi for my next question. Madame Simbizi, vous avez parlé.
You referred to testimony from people within your association, the ones that you serve, who have gone through this opening. How do you think we can better support these people, and what kind of feedback do you get from the community, those people who've gone through Rocks and World or these openings?
Merci.
Thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, we have heard comments from members of our community who have come through that particular path. And we can say with assurance that when they are received, they are well integrated. They come here to study. There are some who get into the workplace and manage to really integrate within the community quite well. I think the challenge has to do with the way in which they're received. The Alliance's proposal or suggestion, as stated in our presentation, would be to provide further resources, whether it would be to the RCMP or the CBSA. Thank you. Madam, do you know why people choose to go through that opening and not through regular borders, an option that is open? Do you have any idea of why? I could say, I mean, I haven't investigated myself, but I've heard people say this. In fact, these people are at an impasse. They have no other choice. As the other witness was saying, she was saying there are people who are really taking this risk, going through other ways, other paths where, in the context of a really tough winter, they are risking their own lives. It's because they have no other choice. So you have to understand.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Simbizi. Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr.
Thank you to the witnesses.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desaep for 6 minutes. Mr. Brunel Desaep, you can please begin.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here with us today for this very important study. I want to speak to all three witnesses, so I'm going to be quick. Quickly, to answer Madame Kayabaga's question, if people are not going through the border, it's because they'll be turned away because of the Safe Third Country Agreement. Madame Simbizi, some advocates, migrant advocates and lawyers who advocate say that we have to suspend that agreement until such time as the agreement between Canada and the U.S. ends in a positive result. Because people could go through a dignified process rather than have to go through something in the woods. Do you agree with that? I think the idea of welcoming these individuals in this way may not be the best means, but certainly the safest route that they can have is that one, because otherwise they'd be forced to take even more dangerous route. So you would agree to the idea of people showing up at a border post, and that if that agreement were suspended, then that would be the result. Would you agree to the suspension of that agreement, that is to have people come through regular border crossings? From what I gather, are you saying you have to suspend the agreement for people to be able to come through Roxham? No, if you suspended the agreement, then people could go through regular border crossings. So there would be dignity throughout the whole border. They wouldn't have to go through just one spot in Roxham Road. If they choose to go this way, it's because they don't have the means, or there are reasons why they can't go through regular border crossings. They're in desperate situations. I think there's been a misunderstanding. If that agreement were to be suspended, they would be able to go through regular crossings. They could do the same thing. They would go through the regular process rather than through Roxham Road. Do you agree with that? If Canada gives them the option to do so. Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, bravo for your work. I've seen you on TV. I want to congratulate you for that. You were talking about minivans. In fact, what we saw in a report on TV is that some of these vans are actually criminal organizations that are charging from $600 to $10,000 per person to bring people who need help to Roxham Road. They're actually being, there's this basically robbery. Are you aware of that situation?
No, I'm not aware that they're trafficking, that they're charging that much money. I mean, there's no way that I can know anything about the money. I have my suspicions, but honestly, when people arrive, and it's that many people, there could be 30, 40, 50 people at once, usually families. My concern is, do they have winter coats, do they have hats, and do they have gloves? And that's all I can say.
Bien sûr.
Of course.
That's a big problem, and that needs to be shut down.
Évidemment, les gens ne veulent pas.
Of course, people don't want to openly say that they had to go through these criminal organizations to get through. It would be heartbreaking to hear that that was the case. Anyhow, I wanted to congratulate you on your work once again. Ms. Ismaïs, I have a question for you, both of you actually, from the UNHCR. What we heard is that advocacy groups for migrants are for the suspension of this third-party agreement. The association of various law associations are as well, that we're hearing that there are these individuals who are actually stealing from these very vulnerable people to get them to Roxham Road. And that it takes up to 14 months to get a work permit. They're on social assistance. It's really not enough to survive. And 50% of the asylum seekers going through Roxham Road will be rejected once their file is looked at. They're going to be living in the country. In Quebec, they will have learned French, and at the end of the day, years later, they'll be sent back to their country of origin. Do you think that is the way for a G7 country, to welcome people?
I will address a part of that question, and I'll let my colleague complement as well. First, just a small correction in terms of 50% of those people actually being returned once a determination is done. So 61% of irregular arrivals are accepted as refugees in Canada currently. That's quite a high statistic in terms of understanding that these people have merits in their claim. And then the ones that do not get accepted have to go through an appeal process. From the irregular arrivals that do go through an appeal process on the merits of their claim, a third of them are either accepted as refugees or returned for another refugee hearing because there was a problem in the process before. And if all of the appeal process has been exhausted, then UNHCR recommends states to return people to their countries of origin to maintain the integrity of the asylum system. And I'll let my colleague as well address a few other parts of your question.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat which parts you wanted answered that she didn't.
Non, mais parce que bon.
We might not have the same figures, but you're telling me that those are the figures. Do you think that makes sense? Is it normal for people who are well integrated, speaking French, working in Quebec, and then 4 years later they're told to go home? Do you think that time lapse is normal?
That part is not necessarily something for UNHCR to comment on.
Okay.
We do note that to keep a very sound asylum system that is strong, that it be used only for asylum. So once someone has exhausted all their levels of appeal, that they either be regularized through another immigration pathway or they be returned to their country of origin.
Est-ce que vous qui travaillez...
Mr. Brunel de Sable, time is up.
On avait une belle discussion.
Oh, we were having such a great conversation.
We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your presentation and for your patience today. My first question is actually to the representatives from the UNHCR. Given that some 61% of the asylum claimants crossing over to Canada actually succeed in proving their claim that they are genuine refugees, why then do you think Canada should keep the Safe Third Country Agreement? Because all that process is doing is forcing people to go through unsafe means to get to safety. If the government suspended or lifted the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, then people would be able to cross over in regular border crossings, get to safety, and still make their claim. Wouldn't that be a better option than to forcing people to trek through snow and in terrible conditions and possibly losing their lives?
It's not for UNHCR to comment on the particular mode that Canada wishes to use for controlling its border. It's an independent sovereign state. As long as the process upholds their international legal obligations, that is our primary concern. And as I said, on my visits to Roxham Road, which are fairly regular, those that I make and that my colleagues make, what we have observed is that notwithstanding the fact that we are using an irregular entry point, the process is handled with a significant degree of care, and it is meeting the minimum legal requirements.
Thank you. Yeah, the matter is actually being challenged in courts right now in Canada. We'll see what the Supreme Court of Canada says about violations of basic human rights. Maybe back to more of a human level, I'll turn my question to the mayor. Given that that's the reality, and you see firsthand of the people coming through and the desperation that they're in, and the story that you just related to us. So I guess my question to you, not for necessarily for you to tell Canada what should be done, but from a human perspective, do you think that it makes sense if Canada were to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement and so that people would be able to get to safety in a safe way and not put their lives in jeopardy?
Well, it's also very hard for me to really make that statement too. It does seem like it would be safer if they could go to the regular crossing and ask for asylum there. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no way to influence the decisions in Canada or in my own country, for that matter, at that level. So that's all I guess I can really say about that.
Well, thank you for that. Very diplomatic to all the witnesses. I get it that you're not here to tell Canada what to do. However, as a Canadian, I'm seeing what's happening, and I vehemently disagree with the Canadian government's approach to this by creating the Safe Third Country Agreement, putting it in place, forcing people to go through irregular means and putting their lives in jeopardy. I don't think it's the right thing to do, nor do I think is a humanitarian thing to do, even though that we have processes to allow for people to make a claim afterwards. There's a better way forward, and we don't have to put people through that process. Now, in the United States, part of the reason why people choose to cross over irregularly here to Canada, I know especially in the beginning when the Trump administration was in power, and part of the issue is that people who are faced with exploitation as a woman and who are faced with challenges in that way have fled their country because they're being persecuted because of their gender. Some are being persecuted because of their sexual identity. And as a result of that, they are trying to get to safety. And the United States has outright to refuse these individuals as asylum claims. Is that still happening in the United States? Maybe the UNHCR can share that information with us.
I will address that question. Recently, in 2021, UNHCR welcomed changes in the U.S. to their decision-making process related to gender-based and gang-related violence claims. So they walked back and they repealed a decision that was called the Matter of AB, that made it more difficult for these populations to make asylum claims in the U.S. So currently there are improvements in the system related to gender-based violence claims and gang-based violence claims in the U.S., and we continue to work with U.S. authorities to improve their system specifically related to these types of claims.
When you say you're working with them to improve the system, what does that mean?
That is in line with our role internationally, like it is here in Canada. We work on a bilateral basis with the U.S. government to make recommendations on the way they determine refugee claims and put forward ways to strengthen that system. And a lot of those recommendations sometimes are publicly available on our websites, and they're also included in a lot of the amicus briefs that we file in various court applications as well.
For the people who fear for their life, who's, declare that they are gay, for example, and who are being hunted down, disowned by their own families, do they know that in the United States that they would actually be able to make a claim? And do you know what information do you have that you can share with us? How many of those individuals' claims have been rejected?
I don't have that statistic on hand with me, but I will say that the U.S. does have a system where people could access counsel, get information on the asylum claim process, and information is also readily available online, and that's all I could address at this moment to that question.
Would you be able to provide those stats to us?
We could provide statistics on, I will undertake to look to see if we have those statistics first and provide them to the committee as well.
Thank you. With this, this panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of this committee, I really want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee and for your patience, and thanks for your adjusting with the schedule of the committee. So it was great to have you all, and if there is anything which you would like to bring to the attention of the committee, and because of time you have not been able to discuss it, you can always send a written submission to the clerk of the committee, and that will be circulated to all the members. Thank you once again, and the meeting is adjourned.